Hey, fellow tennis nerds. I hope all is well. Today I'm here with Ryan Burbary, the owner and founder of Velociti Tennis, the world's first biodegradable tennis string is called Catalyst. I've been testing the string and I was really curious about the whole process, about the how it started, and about the founder, Ryan. So welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited.
Tell me a little bit about your tennis background. First of all, it's one step. You're a pretty young guy. You must be like almost playing tennis from from being born, and then now already creating like a tennis string. It's a pretty rapid process, which is amazing. So, how did you start in tennis?
So, I grew up working in tennis stores. We have my family has some local ones here in Denver. So I've always been around like tennis equipment my whole life. I was cutting out strings when I was a little kid, helping my dad, and been stringing since I'm 12. And now kind of got out of college and wanted to kind of do my own thing, and it drove me nuts seeing like the trash cans full of just discarded tennis strings. So I figured that there had to be something you can do because can't really recycle that, right?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great point. I mean it's one of the things that come up the most when you're in tennis gear is that like how bad of an environmental sport it is. I mean it's a beautiful sport in so many ways, but looking at, for example, ball fluff and the balls with the rubber and everything is very bad. Obviously the polyester strings are not great. So and obviously and all the traveling of the pro. So there's a many different points. So you have to
Yeah.
start somewhere. And you string a lot, like you always strung quite a few rackets, no?
Oh, for sure. I would love to know how many it was, but I definitely stopped keeping count a long time ago. So it might be a little sad to know how many I've done actually.
But it's a lot of learning through that process, right? You learn a lot about the materials as well when you're stringing.
Oh, of course. So learned about, kind of the basics, and then more interestingly, kind of when I started getting into figuring out the manufacturing process and everything to figure out kind of how we can make it biodegradable and what other options there are out there. But it's incredibly interesting, the market as a whole, especially.
So when you started thinking about this, like the possibility of a biodegradable string, like where did you start? Like how do you start that process from idea in your head to actually getting down to production?
Yeah, so originally it just drove me nuts. I mean, we're just tossing it in the trash because, like traditional recycling kind of practices, they're not going to recycle the little bits of string that you cut out of a racket, right? They're going to focus on like a plastic bottle or something like that. So I knew it was unrealistic to be able to recycle them. So I kind of wanted to seek out a better way. And I found some different products and technologies out there that you can implement in like a plastic manufacturing process that makes it biodegradable. So, for example, like you see like the plastic silverware that are starting to be like biodegradable, stuff like that. And I knew, especially polyester strings are made from the same material. So I knew there had to be a way to do it. So it came down to testing out some different additives, getting it manufactured in small test runs, and then testing it both in the racket and testing the biodegradability as well.
How much testing did you have to go through before you actually found something you liked? Was it a long process?
We did it was quite a bit, and there's obviously big lead times too. The bulk of it was actually going on kind of during the pandemic and everything too, which kind of expanded our delays a little bit. We were actually waiting for a big shipment, and it was just sitting in the bay for a long time, and it was driving me nuts. I'm like, all right, I want to try this string. Can you guys get it in so I can get it in my hands and start playing? But yeah, it the delays between kind of the different test runs was the hardest part, just because I'm personally impatient and I kind of want to keep stuff going. So, but it's fun. I mean, I had a bunch of people both here in Denver and across the U.S. that tested the string out. We did kind of a blind test where people tried string with the additive and without it, and it turned out the additive actually played better too, with a little better tension maintenance and a little better durability.
Did you have like a goal string when you set out to do this process, like a string that you really like, that you want this string to be similar to, but maybe in performance somewhat better, or at least to have that extra biodegradable component to it?
Not necessarily a goal one, because I tested a few that were kind of similar. I mean, for the most part, polyester strings are pretty similar as far as the manufacturing process goes, right? Like they just kind of push some plastic through a hole, and you kind of choose what shape you want and stuff like that. But so I knew I wanted to go for a softer poly because I know some of the stiffer ones, kind of mass market wise, isn't it's not as applicable. So I wanted to go with something that kind of not everybody can play with because I know some people still shouldn't be playing with polyester strings, especially kind of the beginners. But I knew the avid tennis player is what I was looking for. So I wanted a soft polyester. A lot of people like shapes polyesters too. So just kind of that middle of the market, just something good all around. There's so many out there. It's hard to pick one that I liked better than the others necessarily.
Yeah, and then you found this one, and you just enjoyed how it played, and then like getting it to market. That's another step of the process. Like getting like a, did you have like a brand name? Did you have, the design, everything in your head on how to kind of distribute this string?
Yeah, for sure. It's still a work in process. I kind of took over the name and then started from scratch with pretty much everything else. So I'm still working on kind of getting distribution in a bunch of places. We have an online store, so you can buy it there. But I had Velocity prior to making the string, but I knew I kind of wanted to figure out a way to make something a little more sustainable, and that was kind of the goal.
Are you now like looking into other possible string options, or are you looking into maybe other products that could be biodegradable in some way now that you have like it at least down to some kind of start?
Yes to both. So right now I'm testing a multi-filament, so I'm trying to figure out exactly because it does change a little bit when there's more filaments in the string. It complicates it a little bit, so a little more testing's involved, especially with the additive. But kind of once we get past that step, I just want to find like a good all-around multi-filament. So then we kind of have options for all tennis players, right? Um, so that's kind of the next on the string front, and then also looking to we're working on grips too, and I think that that's really important, especially like over grips. I mean, I change mine out super often, and I'm sure everybody else does too. Some people less than others, but it's another form of waste, and it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
They'll
it's
just
one of
end
those
up in the
things that,
landfill.
yeah, yeah. No, it's one of those things that sometimes if you're a stringer, if you're string rackets for someone, you get these very disgusting old brown
Ah,
grips, and then you
yep.
have like most advanced players like to change out because I mean you lose a little bit of grip, and that can really affect your play when you're not having fresh over grips.
Oh, exactly. It's so gross when people come in and their grip's like almost black, and you know it's like a Wilson Pro overgrip that was like perfectly white before. And for some reason they say they like it. I don't know if they're just too lazy to change it out or what. But I'm definitely in the camp of changing more often than not.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So this whole work, like your father is a tennis player. That's how you got started in tennis. So
Mhm.
you've been doing this project together, or it's been mainly on your shoulders to do it, or he's been a vital kind of help in this process?
Yeah, he's been an awesome help. Great mentor as far as the business goes. I kind of wanted to do my own thing, so I've kept him involved, but it's really like my baby, if that
Mm.
makes sense. I don't because he's busy enough with his stuff, so I don't necessarily want to, I guess, bother him as much because I want him to handle his stuff, and I've just kind of kept going. But he's been super helpful, bouncing ideas off of him and stuff like that because he comes from a like the retail background of what actually sells to the consumer, right? Without that, it's a little hard to make a product that people want.
Yeah, exactly. No, you have to understand these parts. I mean, like selling is very important as is marketing. Obviously, the product needs to be that good. And I must say, I really like the string when I've been testing it. I've tested 3 sets in different rackets, and I've been enjoying it. It feels crisp in a good way and not harsh on the arm, and I get very good bite on the ball. Like it's quite a good compact feel when you strike the ball. Do you went for 128 gauge? That's what's available for now, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, we're going to expand the line as well. This was kind of just a test, see how it does, and then probably go a little thicker and a little thinner as well. So a couple more options.
Yeah, it's
Hopefully
usually
some new
good.
colors too.
Oh yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, I do like white strings, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. But and also the color, in my experience, tends to change a tiny bit of the playability of the string, right? So you do
Totally.
see some difference, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get some people saying that there's no difference, like some like hard numbers, but I swear every time it's a different color, it plays way different.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty clear, and most people I talk to in the industry agree with this. So it's like I think some people find it hard to think that color affects something, but it does. It's another different chemical component in it, so it does change everything, right? So your own
Exactly. It's just like
tennis,
grips, right?
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
just like no, exactly, just like grips. You're 100% correct. That does change. So your own tennis, do you play like any tournaments still, or what's your tennis schedule right
I
like?
try to. I'm a very mediocre player. I'd like to say I know the equipment a lot better than I am. I like to get out there as much as I can, but between Velocity and then kind of my other job that I've been working, it's hard to make the time to get out there. It's funny. I usually play more in the winter here in Colorado because I actually have to book a court time, versus in the summer there's too many options, so I don't get out there quite as much.
Yeah, I can understand that in a bit. I mean, it's a beautiful place you live in, but you do other sports as well, like snowboarding, golf. What else?
Yeah, snowboarding, golf. I've recently, so Colorado just got their first padel courts,
Oh
so
yeah.
super excited about that. I've been really enjoying playing that recently. Um, I'm kind of over the pickleball thing a little bit. Padel is definitely better, and if I'm gonna go, I'm gonna play tennis instead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with the pickleball paddle and the tennis thing because I think they can all coexist and be happy together. I think there's a little bit of a pickleball and tennis war in the US and certain
For sure.
locations. But then like in the middle there's paddle who doesn't seem to annoy as many people because you don't fight of the same court space. So it's just like a different court, different
Exactly.
sport. And it kind of marries with better with tennis because there are like lighter, softer tennis balls and you're not using strings on your racket, obviously, but it's more similar scoring and everything to
Hmm.
tennis than pickleball.
Exactly. A little more exciting too, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's more pace and so on, right? So that's cool that you can play that. That's great. When it
Yeah.
comes to your studies, like did the studies you studied accounting and finance, right? Did that
Hmm.
prepare you for your like you're an entrepreneur now, so did that prepare you for this job or this
It
kind of
it
mission you
definitely
have?
helped. Not necessarily in the ways. I mean, I didn't study like manufacturing or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been learning in the real world. But I don't know that that's. I think I'm learning more in that space, actually doing it versus kind of being in school. It was nice to get the background in finance and accounting. I really enjoyed it. But the manufacturing side, I definitely didn't have as much knowledge starting out. So it's kind of um, I've had to get a little bit of help on that, but it's been super interesting kind of learning about that.
Do you feel like it's a steep learning curve to get into manufacturing? Because you kind of have to dive right in and start like doing stuff. You can't just, there's no like theoretical component that's going to help you that much in the beginning because you just need to get products in your hand to test. That's really the first step.
Exactly. Yeah, and like the minimum order quantities, all that kind of stuff. That definitely that's kind of originally why we just stuck with the 16 gauge to start because I wasn't sure if the string was going to be well accepted, if people were going to appreciate the environmental component of it. But it's gone well so far, so definitely looking to kind of integrate some more gauges as well as colors and stuff like that.
What's been your thinking, right? Getting a new string out. I know it's always a situation where you want to get your product in the hands of players and of people who are talking about tennis and people who love the sport and so on. Do you have like a strategy for that, or is something you're kind of learning now as you go?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's like the Selenkos of the world, and they've been very successful, especially in the last 5 years. And they did a lot of like seeding strings, so going to whatever tournaments and handing out sets for people to try, and that it's been super successful. Right now, that hasn't really been in the cards because I'm kind of trying to secure funding as I go
Yeah.
and build it that way. So I'm just kind of trying to take a different approach, be a little more creative with who I reach out to, kind of what partnerships I can build. And I've been trying to get in a lot more brick and mortars because as important as the online retailers are, I think for the most part, someone goes in and they're going to talk to their pro shop. or their teaching pro, or their stringer, and they're going to give the advice because most of the tennis players out there don't know what they're looking for necessarily.
No, I agree. I think this is a little bit of a problem we have in general. I mean, there's a lot of information online, but sometimes the information when you get into a shop is limited, right? So you want pro shops to have good products, but also some good knowledge to be able to kind of recommend the right thing, because you see a lot of tennis elbows and so on, which usually lead from maybe using the wrong tension, the wrong string for your game, and the wrong racket. Obviously, there's lots of technical issues involved as well, how you hit the ball and so on, but you can mitigate some of those issues with the right equipment.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want the little kind of old lady playing with an RF 95 or 97 or any of the prestiges. That's not a good setup, even though they look cool, right? You kind of need that expertise to push someone in the right direction. And I think the online doesn't give as much information as they should, as far as it's hard to it's hard to guess what kind of tennis player someone is um, by just like reading an article and stuff like that, right? You kind of
Yeah,
have to
I
test
think
it
I
a
think
little more.
yeah, you're on it there. I think sometimes it's a bit like if you go to a website, it's hard to get like a idea of where am I in the categories of all the things being offered, right? So you have like polys, do you need soft poly, stiff poly, multi, if you just look at strings, and then you get into tension, and that's another issue. So you have gauges, type of string, tension, and then what am I even using the right racket? While in golf, if you, for example, you have a lot of these kind of custom shops where you kind of you can't just order a set online. You kind of need to
Hmm.
go to a custom shop and get a fit, right? Like this is the grip, this is the length of
Exactly.
club you're using, and we're missing that in tennis a little bit. It doesn't seem as serious. It seems like you can just go into any Walmart and just buy a racket from the shelf, although that can be really detrimental to your passion for tennis in the long run or how you will do in the game.
Exactly. I mean, it'll hold you back developmentally if your racket's either too big, too heavy, any of those factors. I think it makes a huge difference. And that's why I really like the idea of, not only because I grew up working in one, but I think kind of the local stores, number one, they're a facilitator for the tennis community as a whole. I mean, sponsoring events, any of that kind of stuff, to also just being able to provide the expertise. Because you or I could go online and probably obviously figure out what racket we're looking for, right? But someone just starting, they're just going to Google best tennis racket, and it's going to be, well, the number one seller is the Pure Arrow, right? But I don't know that that's necessarily the best option for you, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people use, I mean, watching tennis on TV or streams as their guidance to what rackets they should use, which I mean turns leads to sticky situations where you're like, okay, what's Federer using? I love Federer, and people
Yeah,
buy the RF97, which is an amazing racket if you're the player to handle it, which is mainly Roger Federer. No, I mean a lot of players can use it, but it's quite a limiter in terms of if you're a rec player or a beginner, it's not the right choice, right? So that's where it gets problematic, that people look at the pros and want to use the pros. I think they think that the latest and greatest version, like for example, you're buying an iPhone Pro Max, that's the best model. But in tennis, it's not
hmm
like that. It's not like it's what's for you. You know.
exactly. I mean, I think the most recent one is I've had a lot of people looking for the Rafa Origin racket. I'm like, I can't even swing that thing for more than 3 games. You absolutely should not be playing with that.
Yeah, I think it's just like that fascination with the heroes and the pros, and like if you look at other sports, it's mainly like, I mean, it's the same in golf in general. Like you shouldn't play with the same clubs as the leading pros. It's not the way to go. They are so good at striking the ball, and they play the game differently, and people should know that already. And I think in golf it's a little bit more. There's more awareness of it because those kind of pro shops have been around for a long time and try to educate people like, okay, you're a pretty, beginning player. You need to actually use clubs that help you hit the ball properly. I mean, in the beginning, I think people did the mistake of buying these very difficult clubs, but it's been growing the knowledge, around the pro shops for some years now, I think.
Oh, exactly. And I think a big thing is like, at least in here in the US, you have to have certifications to be a golf pro. And they're pretty, like the standards are high. Whereas I think in the tennis industry, they're quite a bit lower. I mean, which isn't a bad thing because you get more people that are willing to coach, but also their knowledge base is a lot lower. So at least here we see a lot of people recommending the wrong products or anything like that. I mean, the pros act like they know what they're talking about because maybe they think they do, but realistically, a lot of them don't, and they recommend the wrong products, and it's detrimental to the development of the player as well as tennis as a whole because you get less people interested.
Yeah, I think tennis has a problem in the terms of like the difficulty level is so high. So whatever you can do to kind of make that transition into tennis as a sport a bit easier, they will also help pick up players from pickleball that might find it boring or just they got bored with it, and then they can move on to tennis. But if the jump in the level of being a tennis player is so high, so that's why I usually think like it's maybe start with green balls, like green dot balls, which
Hmm.
are easier and slower. Use a big racket, play doubles where you have a less court coverage. You don't need to run so much. So there are ways to make tennis easier, but it seems like a lot of people are just going out on a singles court, which is a lot of court to cover, and they're playing with heavy rackets, heavy balls, and that leads to pretty quickly like fatigue, tennis elbow, and issues where you kind of go away from tennis because it was too much to handle. Do you see that as well?
Exactly. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think tennis needs to get better at. I mean, together, I think yes, the tennis community can get their heads around it, but it's tricky, because you always have to deal with the opposing market forces or whatever, because there's always like people want to sell
Yeah,
a product, and then there's what product they should be selling, right, for the right audience.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into the sustainability thing too. I mean, um, one of the products I tried to kind of launch was selling string to retail stores without packaging. Just because nobody realistically uses the packaging. I mean, it, the string type and gauge and all that stuff is printed on the string directly, so you don't need the packaging. You could just, and it just gets thrown out as soon as we start stringing it. So I tried that, and there was some pushback because it was different than what the market's used to. But I think that was it was an interesting test because it's like how far can I get it to where we're still getting rid of like useless packaging basically. But it, it's the pushback of kind of the market as a whole because that's what people are used to, right?
Yeah, I find packaging really frustrating generally. I mean, like I test so many strings and have a bunch here, and it's like if I get it like this, I don't know the string exactly, but it's like this, it's fine. This is one
Hmm.
tiny piece of plastic here that holds it together. You can probably have a string or whatever, but it's just that's good. But why do you need like because that's I mean it's a marketing thing, I guess. That's why they need the packaging. But if you had
Totally.
like in the shop, if you had, for example, the sets like that, and then you had a sleeve or something to put them in if you're buying several sets, or just like a logo above the string set, so you see, okay, this
Hmm.
is the catalyst, and this is this, and then like you say, it's a little bit a thing that it's there, but if we question it, it might not be necessary.
Exactly. I mean, number one, it would get rid of weight and emission costs. Um, just because, I mean, we all know there's some packages that are a little heavier and a little more plasticky versus, I think the cardboard ones are better, obviously, but all of them, I think it's a little bit useless, especially in like a tennis store environment where you're just going to take it off the wall, tear the packaging off, and throw it on the racket, right?
Yeah, and it's like it ends up. I get so much waste in tennis. Just like I mean, the racket boxes I get. Okay, the boxes I ship other rackets in them, or they go. At least they are possible to recycle. But there's a lot of plastic going on because there's like plastic on the racket, like the grip of the racket. That's maybe hard to get rid of. I don't know, and a few other things to do. It's like plastic is everywhere, and you have to kind of question every in a manufacturing process. If you really want to be environmentally focused, you have to kind of question every piece of plastic that you're putting on something, right? I have to like, is this really what we need? Can we get around this? Can we use something else?
Yeah.
I think that's
Oh,
great.
exactly. I mean, Will Luxlon's new string that it came out with, it's a great idea. I'm glad someone else is starting to kind of move towards that kind of more sustainable a little bit with being recycled material. I think you got Luxlon and then what is it, Restring One? Is that the other one?
Yeah, but that's no. Yeah, the packaging is at least paper. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not made from PET bottles, right?
Okay. Yeah. But it's nice to see it, but that's just pushing the problem along, I guess. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, because it's great they're using PET bottles. I mean, I'm glad they're getting them out of like a landfill or wherever the ocean, wherever they're going to end up, right? But it's just expediting or pushing the problem along. It's not like, because plastic will sit in the landfill for hundreds of years, right? So one stage isn't going to make a big difference, and realistically, the string's not going to get recycled then. So there needs to be a different way to be able to get rid of the string waste after that kind of use, because it's not like you can reuse string or anything like that either.
No, it's tough because like I think sometimes you need to turn the problem on its head, like because I mean sometimes things have been thought through and there are no better options at the moment, or we have to do small tweaks. But in some cases, you can actually there haven't been enough investigation in what is a challenging way or like a way an approach that is new that can put this problem on its head, right? So I think that's you need to challenge yourself a little bit in the thinking and say, okay, we do it like this. For example, like I also think with the reels, if you buy a reel, it's always a plastic reel. And there must be other ways
Hmm.
you can do that, you know. So there's if you're buying a reel, it's always a plastic roll. And even when you're buying like this, because if you buy the Luxlon Eco strings, they come with some paper packaging, which is great. But if you're buying the reel, I'm sure it's going to be a plastic reel. So they need to
Oh,
also
for
think
sure.
about that, you know. So
Yeah, some sort of like cardboard reel or
yeah,
some material like that that'll be durable enough, thrown in your bag, tossing around. But still, you can either toss it in the trash or compost it. Something like that would be awesome. I think another big opportunity would be trying to figure out what you could do with balls. I mean, that that's the biggest tennis waste that's out there, right? I mean, number one, you got the can, that's all plastic, which that can be recycled, great. But the ball with the fuzz and all that kind of stuff, it's that's I think the biggest problem facing kind of sustainability in tennis.
yeah, I think the ball is a big issue. I mean, there's one company in the Netherlands that do like a they call renewable. I haven't tried their balls, so I don't know. But they take old ball fluff, old balls, and remake them into new balls. That's the
Oh,
idea.
interesting.
Yeah, so that there are initiatives, but then to get it on a scale, because like when Wilson launched their Trinity ball, the Trinity Pro, that was more of a packaging thing. So it's like, okay, this is in a
Hmm.
paper, but it's still the same. I mean, it's like the same ball. It's just like, you know, you remove the pressure, so you have you know, a pressureless ball, which is usually not the best ball to play with unless you have use
Yeah,
a ball machine. So it doesn't really solve it. It's just kind of like, then I find it becomes kind of linguistics more than it's actually addressing the problem. It's more like you change the language, you did some with the packaging, but it's also comes with a compromise with the ball you're buying. You're not buying a gas ball then. So it's like the
yeah.
problems need to be tackled from a more fundamental level.
And they play so different. I mean, I like throwing. I have Trinities in my basket that I have at home. It's nice because they don't go dead as fast, so they last a little bit longer, which is awesome. But I'm not going to go play a match with those. I mean they they kind of feel like rocks, right? They play super fast, and especially here in Colorado where it's high altitude, we need to slow it down as much as possible. So pressureless balls are a little tougher here. I love the concept and they last longer, so it's fun to if I'm going to go out and hit with a buddy or something like that to have those. But um, I don't see, especially like on the tour, there's no way they're going to use like a pressureless ball there. But
No, and
I know
that's
we,
probably where the biggest ball waste is, because on the tour, for example, you have so many cans of balls just I mean, because the pros they go through like 7 games and they're changing balls. So it's like, can you imagine the
yeah.
ball waste in an ATP 1000 tournament? You know, it's huge.
Oh, exactly. I can't remember what the figure is, but like the U.S. Open ball numbers are just baffling how many they go through. And that's every tournament, right? So, and the balls aren't like, they're very used, especially for the pros perspective. I mean, rec players probably wouldn't notice if it's more used or not. But it, figuring out what can be done there, I think would be, if someone can do that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, because I've noticed also with the balls, I think post-pandemic, I don't know, it seems like the quality of the balls are less good. I mean, that's just my feeling. I've seen it from other people as well, but it's like
Hmm.
you pick up some cans of balls, like they last like 1 hour. They used to last
Yeah,
few hours, but now it's like they're gone after 1 hour. I'm like, what's happening? This is some
100%.
rubber stuff, or what are you doing?
Yeah, and I think that had to do with because they had the whole supply chain backup, where nobody had balls. I don't know it, especially. I mean, here in the U.S., it was hard to come by to get a case of balls from any of the vendors. Um, it was a little easier to find some of the high altitude ones, but I know some of the low altitude stores that I talked to. During the pandemic, it was so hard to find balls, and then I think then the manufacturers were like, "Hey, we need balls now." So I think the quality control dropped a little bit, and that's why we've seen a lot less be, being able to use them not as long, stuff like that.
Have you noticed like how much complaints there've been about balls on the tours? Like they've been talking about like the balls are heavy, and that's probably not a quality
Hmm.
control issue. Might be a little bit that balls are destroying people's arms as well because they're like so like heavy, and the courts are slower, and obviously the way pros hit balls, like they
Yeah.
go all in on so many shots. It's like becoming like a sport that kind of breaks you down quite quickly. Have you seen that story?
Oh, definitely. And it's interesting because I think another one of the things is they change balls so often in every tournament too. I mean, each vendor sponsors a certain tournament, right? And some of the lead up ones. But when you're moving around, flying all over the place, you're not going to get the same ball over and over and over again. And then mix that with different court surfaces, whether it be a faster or slower hard court or moving from super spinny clay to kind of a flat hard court. It's hard to adjust your body to that, I'm sure. So yeah, I think that's probably a big factor. I mean, I don't know a lot of sports out there. There's a consistent ball for every event, right?
Mm.
Tennis, we go through balls really fast, and I don't know how realistic it would be for, like, for example, a Wilson or a Penn or something like that to sponsor all of the ATP or all of the WTA. But a little bit better ball requirements maybe might be one of the factors, but it seems like they're kind of more all over the place than they've ever been.
Yeah, maybe some kind of standardization at least. So if it's a tour ball, they have to have these following requirements, and there's like a player council that needs to approve the balls. So they say, okay,
Hmm.
these balls are close enough, and we use this ball for the first quarter of the season, then the second quarter. Maybe I mean there are ways you can address it. I understand like okay, tournaments need sponsors. A ball sponsor is a big thing. They want to bring their product. But if at least there's some standardization, you have the balls playing more similarly because now there are
Hmm.
like with strings, like with rackets, that things on paper look like, oh, but this is the same thing. It weighs the same grams. But it's like when you play tennis, all the secrets are in the margins, right? The small margins, that's where the difference is. And everybody who plays tennis on a decent level, they will understand, like, okay, this is a different ball, this is a different string, this is a different racket.
Oh, exactly. And it's amazing when you switch from one ball to another, whether it's the same manufacturer, like a Wilson US Open, or to like a Dunlop. I mean, they're both great balls, but they play different. Some fluff up a little faster, some are a little harder. I mean, they're all over the place. And I think the biggest thing, I don't know what it's like outside of the US, but like the Costco pen ball is the most popular because they're the least expensive. Um, and that's what people go for. But I've always played with a nice ball, so it drives me insane when I have to play with this kind of price point ball it doesn't play as well. It goes dead faster. I can't stand it.
No, no, it ruins the experience. Like I've had situations where you get to a training session, maybe someone new, like people come here to Spain and they've seen my channel, for example, and they want to play, and I'm like, yeah, sure, let's play,
Mhm.
I mean, it's like always a question in tennis, like who should bring the pack of balls, like who pays the court, who pays the
Yeah.
balls is always a funny thing. But it's like, and maybe you don't have any fresh balls, and one guy brings a package and it's like some cheap old or whatever ball, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh no, no, we can't play with this.
Yeah. No,
It's
no,
not
we'll
good.
use mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny like that because it's like people don't realize. I think equipment in every sport, pretty much, but equipment like especially in a sport like such as tennis, like so technical, it
Hmm.
changes the experience so much. So if you have the nice racket with
100%.
the right string setup, hitting the ball is feels good, it feels right, it doesn't hurt you. It's so much more fun to play. It's like the sensation you get is so much more enjoyable than if you use the wrong everything. That really hurts the experience completely.
Oh, 100%. An aluminum racket versus a graphite. It is quite a bit more expensive to play with a graphite, but the experience is so much better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It
they'll
doesn't
last
bend.
longer than like an aluminum.
Yeah, exactly. The aluminum really bends after, like, if you hit
Oh
hard, it just
yeah.
goes and warps
I
straight
I
away.
can't remember the last time I hit with one, but I remember we were on a trip somewhere and they had like aluminum rackets. I was like, yeah, we'll give it a try, and it's terrible.
Yeah, it's not the same sport. It's not the same. Like, then you rather
Yeah,
have a pickleball racket to do that. It's like that's
exactly.
how bad it is. Yeah. So have you thought about how you can bring sustainability to pickleball, or you haven't thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely options out there. I mean, most things are made of plastic other than the paddles themselves. Between the ball,
Well, it's
grips,
very plastic.
yeah, it's a plastic ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely room for that as well. It's been growing so fast, and the speaking of balls, their ball changes even more than the tennis ball does. It seems like every 2 or 3 months there's a new ball that comes out that's kind of the next best one. As, which it's hard to keep up, but I'm kind of trying to focus on tennis because that's what I know best as far as the equipment goes. But definitely a possibility in the future too.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, it's more throwing that out there. It's a bit fun. People get pissed when I ask pickleball questions. No, so I'm thinking one thing. Like, you're from Boulder, like a beautiful Colorado is a beautiful place.
Mhm.
Um, do you think like you get a stronger sense of care for the environment when you're from a more picturesque, beautiful, nature-ridden place than if you're, for example, from like a city full of toxic shit and stuff? Like, or do you think that affects like your trajectory in life?
I feel like it probably does a little bit. I mean, there definitely are places, shops that I've talked to, they're like, that's great, but I don't think any of my customers really care, which that's fine. I mean, that's how they look at the world, but I like to keep the beautiful things that we have. But if you don't see them, how are you going to want to know that you want to make sure it stays that way, right? I'd say it does change. Like if you're in kind of a dirty city versus like a nice kind of clean outdoor environment, it makes a difference.
Yeah,
I
I think
think
it
at
should
least.
then, because like it's hard to appreciate what you don't have, right? You can't really make a. I
Exactly.
mean, you can go on vacations, but still, like if you're waking up and you're like, yeah, I'm in this like the clean air or a beautiful place, you see some mountains or whatever, like you more naturally have that sense of appreciation, and maybe you want to make sure that in the world we live in, that's pretty fast paced and full of plastics and stuff, like you want to make an effort. Or was that something you always felt like intrinsically that you want to do something in this vein, or it kind of happened by happenstance, like it just came about?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of I've grown up love hiking, all that kind of stuff, and love spending time outdoors. So it drives me nuts to think, especially, I mean, I love we're not close to an ocean here in Colorado, but I love the ocean, and you read all the articles and stuff online about how much plastic is out there. I mean, just floating around, and it it can't be good for us either, right? So you have to look at it in the grand scheme of things with like microplastics being out there floating around or any of that kind of stuff. So if you can start pushing in the direction, it, I think it'll be better in the long run for everybody. It's hard because I want to like you don't want to take a huge step, and because nobody's going to change for the most part. Nobody's going to change their buying habits as far as string, right? Um, for the most part, people aren't going to. They're not going to sacrifice environmentally sustainable for not playing as well. I'd say at
Mm.
least most people won't.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to make sure the products are both good, competing with any other product that's out there, but also that you get that extra benefit of being environmentally sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think the product, I think it's smart to be very aware of how consumers move, because like if you're a tennis player and you care about your performance, on some level. Like you don't want to have like a substandard product because you're into the environment. People won't do that. Like it's if
Yeah,
I play guitar and someone gives me a guitar that's more environmentally friendly, but I play better with another guitar, I'm gonna use the other guitar. A lot of people are that
exactly.
with cars. They don't want to have an electric car because they like the roaring sound of the V6 or V12 or whatever. So
Hmm.
it's an but I think in tennis, which I've noticed now, at least from a tennis nerd point of view, is that people are a little bit more open, also even on the pro tour, like to changing strings. I think rackets
Hmm.
sometimes people get stuck. Rackets seem very similar but are very different. A change can be very tough in a rackets. But if you have a racket
Yeah.
you like, you can be people are quite open to just saying, oh, does this string give me more spin or a bit better control, or can I get more power? And the string choice and tension can actually change the racket drastically in how it plays. So I think there's a little bit more of an openness, and I see people requesting more and more string reviews. And I talk to several pros, weekly kind of or monthly about their string choice. People ask for consultations for help. So I think
Hmm.
there's a room there for changing people's minds and changing their opinions and actually questioning maybe their current choice.
Exactly. I think some of that comes from like everybody thinks of like their racket as their racket, and people like experimenting around and stuff like that. But I think string feels like maybe a smaller thing to change because I mean, even though it's the thing you're hitting the ball with, it still feels a lot smaller. Like you can maybe change it a little more often. And number one, it's less expensive to change than a racket, right? Especially once you get better. If you have to buy four new rackets, you don't want to buy rackets as often, right? Um, so I think that's the good thing. I mean, I love messing around with strings. I love new tensions, new strings. Anytime we get a new string in the tennis stores, I love trying it. Even after I started Velocity, I still play with Catalyst because I really like the environmentally friendly and I like how it plays. But it's always fun to kind of test out new ones and see kind of what the competitors are doing now.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's like you said, it's a lot of fun. So does your father run the tennis store, right? Is that correct or no?
Yeah, yeah. So he owns all four of them
Oh, very cool.
and kind of runs
Yeah.
them
So
too.
this was
Yeah,
like your life being in a tennis store from a young age.
exactly. Yeah,
Do you have any
I'd like
brothers
to
and
say
sisters?
no. So I'm an only child. So I got tricked into working kind of growing up and not tricked. I enjoy being in there. I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I was in like high school and stuff like that, my off periods or lunch, I'd just go and hang out in the store and string some rackets or something like that. Just because I like being in there. I like being around tennis. Um, Working with customers is great. I mean, it's always fun experimenting, helping other people experiment too, right? Like, hey, I'm looking for some more spin, but I want to stick with this. What can we do? It, I just love the process. And then the best part is when they come in and they're like, you picked the right string. I mean, it's always fun because you're helping them improve, even if it's a little bit. You're helping them kind of improve their game as well.
Yeah, you get some validation of your knowledge, which is nice, but also, I mean, I think everybody gets some kind of dopamine hit or whatever from getting validation, helping someone, but actually the process of helping someone feels good. It's supposed to feel good in humans, I think. So I think that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And also, I guess as a kid, being in a shop where there's always happening, I mean, stuff is happening, right? People are coming in, there's conversations, rackets are being strung. It must be great, right? That's like a part of like a more bustling instead of being in an office. Sometimes not the most exciting.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm kind of getting that office life a little bit, and I'm missing that number one, being able to wear shorts all the time. I miss my tennis shorts so much. Um, but it's all different. Yeah, it was certainly a fun experience to kind of grow up working in there and get my fair share of stringing too.
Yeah, you started stringing when you were 14, right? So and then like how long did it take you to be really proficient at stringing?
I mean, I, stringing is a weird one because you can always kind of improve. I mean, there's always things you can do to be a better stringer. And I love chatting with other stringers that have different certifications and stuff like that. And like, hey, if they're in the store, or if we're somewhere, I'm like, hey, watch me string a racket. Let me know if you find anything. And we kind of trade tricks and stuff like that. It's fun. I strung at a women's challenger out in Las Vegas last year, and that was fun to just see. Number one, the pros kind of they they change strings out so much more often than anyone thinks. I mean, after every match, stuff like that. And it's always funny. One girl walked up and I'm like, "Hey, you broke a string. Congrats. Is that the first one you broke?" Or and she's like, "I actually haven't broken a string in a long time. I just cut them out." And that was one of the things. It was a little eye opening because it's like on the professional level, there I can't imagine what the string waste is at any of the major tournaments or anything like that.
No, no, and like on the WTA, they don't break strings as frequently as I mean on the men's tour, like they do have a lot of string breakage. Most people, not all of
Hmm.
them, uh, but on the women's tour, but they still want the strings redone a lot. Like I've strung, I helped out like Nikki who runs the stringing operation here,
Hmm.
and like if he's busy, and I'll string for Muguruza or someone who's training here, and they can hand in rackets, and you're like, this is still playable, but they just want it fresh,
Yeah.
even for training, you know.
Oh, exactly. And it's amazing, especially I think a lot of people don't know about the how polyester works either. The tension drop is huge with polyester versus a multi-filament. It doesn't drop as much. I I think polys play amazing. That first string, everything feels great when you first string it, right? But especially polyesters, and then you get that first drop, tension drop, and then it kind of starts to feel a little dead. Um, and a lot of people don't realize that when they try out a polyester for the first time or anything like that, right? Versus the pros obviously know about that, so they go have a practice once, and then they're like, "All right, time to restring." So it's
Yeah,
just a different mentality.
yeah. Nikki was a little bit surprised here in the Malaga Challenger where that they were not changing strings so much because the courts were so fast. So it also depends a little bit. Like, I mean, they obviously still want rackets restrung, but compared to like the conditions make a difference. Also, like how often they break and what type of obviously tension and so on. But also on the lower levels, like this was a pretty good challenger. Had Bautista Agut, had Carvalles Baena, some good players.
Yeah.
Benoit Paire, but they were still not enough, like still not as much stringing as he thought it would be because people were like, okay, I can play with this. I string two rackets and I'll be fine, fast hardcore. So
Yeah. Oh, no kidding. And it's interesting to see. Um, I mean, even labor costs on the pro side of things. That's usually the driver. I mean, that's the driver for everywhere, right? But I think paying for someone that knows what they're doing versus someone that does it out of their garage makes a huge difference too. I mean, obviously at the pro events, they should have the best stringers, right? But at the rec level, giving it to your buddy who has no idea what they're doing, a good string job's a good string job. There's not really a good way to get around that.
no, it's true. I think that could be an interesting example. Like you could have someone, string a racket. You could do like a blind test and like forget maybe to do
Hmm.
the tension knots or whatever that's common for players who are not stringing so much, or maybe they use a drop weight. It's not maybe as exact, or maybe they have some they don't clamp enough or close enough or something. There's a few things that over over the whole stringing process drops tension, and I mean maybe it looks a bit like a smile instead of like a straight string. So there are a
Yeah.
few things there that affect a lot the playabilities, and then you have a pro who strings. It's not the speed of the process; it's really the attention to detail and like the way they've done it so many times is like all ingrained, the right routines, the right habits. So it would be fun to give like rackets to people, like black them out or and just like here's one A and B and see how
Yeah.
how different it is. I think people would be
What do you
shocked.
like better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to play around with that stuff. I have one buddy that's been kind of traveling around the U.S. a little bit, and he got to one place and he saw the guy stringing, and he's like, "I can't let this guy string my racket." So he's like, "Can I pay labor, but I'll use your machine to string it really quick?" And the guy's like, "I guess," but it makes a big difference, especially mentally, right? If you're not going to the same guy, um, it's going to feel different.
Yeah, you have to trust your equipment. That's the craziness of what the world I've been in for a while. It's like also, and you yourself as well. It's like if you don't trust what you're playing with, then I mean, tennis is a mental sport like so many other sports, but it's extremely mental because you're alone on the court. And then if you start doubting the equipment, you start doubting yourself, and then it all goes downhill like quite quickly as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the mental aspect of tennis is, I would argue, the hardest part. I mean, technique you can learn that, but getting past that mental side of things is kind of the biggest hurdle. And again, back to the changing habits of what string you use, right? People aren't going to change unless there's unless it's better, right?
Yeah, yeah,
They're
exactly.
not changing
You
to a
need
worse string.
no, no, exactly, and they will feel it. Like even I've given out like when I used to string for people. And now I only string for myself, but I used to have like a small shop in Malta when I lived there, and
Hmm.
people used to come in. I'll string them a racket, and then including like I picked like what they usually don't have a idea at all about strings. So they'd be like, okay, what is arm friendly? That's the most common question, you know.
Yeah.
They want spin and stuff, but like similar to what you mentioned, like you get if it's a good match, they very grateful. They enjoy their tennis more, and it has pretty bigger impact than people think. You know, it sounds very trite in a way, but it's like if you're feeling better when you're on the court, like because of your equipment, it's gonna make a big difference in your game as well, probably because you have more confidence. So it's like it's just a snowballing effect in the right way.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, with the arm friendly thing, the one where you try everything, it's like, all right, here's some natural gut, try this, and it's perfect, right? Gut's always so fun to play with. It hurts the wallet a little bit more than everything else, but yeah, it's always an interesting one when you kind of find that right string.
Yeah, and it's I mean the gut is amazing. He holds tension so well as well. So it's like it's people shouldn't overlook it, even though it's been I mean it's been around for so long. But it's like it's one of those that if you haven't
Yeah.
tried it in your life, string up a racket, either a hybrid or a full bed, and see how you just to get that experience. It's a little bit Rolls Royce. I mean, it's not going to
Oh,
give you the same
exactly.
spin, but at least it the feeling is nice, and it lasts longer than you think, right?
Oh, exactly. And it has to be a nice gut. There's some cheaper ones out there, and I've we had a few sample sets come through and hit with those, and it broke too fast, and it didn't play quite as well. But like the Babylon VS gut is like the best of the best.
Yeah, that's a dream to play with. When it comes to like, I mean, you've been working in a shop, so you've been testing strings and gear with your father for like a long time, like for many years, or so
Hmm.
that's how it's been.
Yeah, it's always fun. I mean, it it sounds kind of weird, but we always get the new rackets in before kind of they're out, and I'm sure you have the same thing. It's always fun to see what the new improvement is. Judge the paint job before anyone else can see it. So it's always fun kind of experimenting with that kind of stuff. Um, and year to year, there are improvements. I mean, even though they're small, if you hit with a 2000 pure drive to the current one, I mean, it's a big difference as far as the feel, the dampening. I think dampening's been an awesome thing to implement across the board, just to help the arms out a little bit. I mean, especially rec players. I mean, no one has perfect technique at the rec level, so uh, as long as it's not a super heavy or stiff racket, that if you have one of those, you need a little extra dampening in there to help out with the vibration.
Yeah, I think I think sometimes, I mean, it's easy to be usually in online stuff. Like if you roast things, you get more views and more clicks. People like you to be angry online. It's a kind of the
Yeah.
natural emotion to have when you're on Twitter or X, and you're doing YouTube. If you can roast a product, people are very happy. But I don't really like it because in general, and I talked to Chris Edwards from Tennis Warehouse the other day about this as well. It's like products are getting better. Like the dampening, as you said, like
Hmm.
it's the rackets are generally improved. It might not be like a huge improvement, maybe not worth your 250, $300 to buy a new racket if you're using the previous model. But
Yeah.
if you're testing them side by side, people will notice. Like it's a this one feels a bit better. It's a bit cleaner, has a bit better feedback. It's not like super drastic, but it's there. So if you're a little bit keen on equipment, it makes sense. And you have to give it to the companies as well, because if they have like these 2-year cycles or 3-year cycles sometimes with products, obviously if they put the engineers on it, these are not idiots. Like they know what they're doing, so they will
Yeah.
try to make an improvement. It doesn't always work out, but it's generally like there are really no bad rackets being sold today. I would say that's pretty clear.
Oh, exactly. I played the V Core Pro, or I did, and I'm switching to the Per set now. Because it's not. it's not a huge difference, but it's a noticeable difference, and I personally like it better. Um, it's always I'm a big paint job guy, so I miss the purple on it a little bit.
Yeah.
We got the Velocity purple, so it was perfect. But um, it's fun. It's fun switching and trying new stuff. It's been nice to see. I remember back when like Wilson had all the S patterns. Those were kind of fun rackets a little bit just to mess around with because
Yeah.
you can get a crap ton of spin with those things. They went a little long and got a pretty high launch angle, but they were fun to mess around with, and it's been interesting to see whether it's the 100D in the Percept line. Um, that was an interesting string pattern that I hadn't seen in a little while, and it's been nice to see a few more 1620s in the market too. Just throw another cross in there and stiffen up the string bed a little bit. It's been interesting to see kind of the different changes that they've been making.
Yeah, sometimes they have to take risks. I mean, like the origin from Babla was a risk in a way. Heads
Hmm.
rackets have been pretty safe bets, but subtle improvements. I agree with the Percept line, 100% that it's a very. I quite significantly thought they were just like a little bit more stable. Like I just for me it felt like this. I didn't play with the V-Core Pro as my standard racket, but the Percept I could really envision myself playing with. I thought that the
Hmm.
improvement was that significant. You're playing with the regular 97 or like the D or the H?
The H, I shouldn't be, but I like heavy rackets for whatever reason. And I don't know. So I'm playing with the H right now, and I thought some of the other ones weren't as big of an improvement, but the H was pretty noticeable for me. I'm
Yeah,
sure that's just because I play with the old one, but
no, I think the H. I mean, it was a little bit easier to use, right? Because they dropped the swing weight a bit. Because I had the V-Core
hmm.
Pro 97H, which I loved. I really loved that racket, even though it had like a 347 strong swing weight with a
Hmm.
normal 125 gauge poly. But it was just like such a tank. And when you were feeling the ball, you were like really feeling the ball.
Yeah.
But this one had like 332, the one I got, strung with Polytor Pro or something, and I really felt like it had a little bit of a more ease of use than the previous one, which I think was needed, because it's still a beefy stick.
Oh, exactly. And I think swing weight is such an underrated statistic for rackets. It's hard to explain to people how it works a little bit, but the general idea is pretty transferable, and it's a better way to explain rackets because you can have a super light racket. I think back to the weird one where like the head MXGs, if you remember those, where
Yeah, the
it
magnesium
was
brick.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, it was like a super light racket, but there was more weight towards the head, so the swing weight went up, and it was just interesting how those played because it was so different than if you just looked at the specs, like, oh, it's a 9.5 ounce racket. I don't want to hit with that. But it was more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And I think swing weight, especially, um, needs to be mentioned a little bit more, especially on the. I mean, I'd like to see it on rackets. I hate when the companies decide not to put any of the specs on the rackets. It drives me insane. But swing weight might be an interesting one to add on there. It is tough with quality control, but I'd like to see that on there a little bit more.
yeah, those are average specs anyway. I think for me, it's been one of my biggest rants. It's been like swing weight needs to be one of those metrics that they actually promise something. I would say I would hope like 5 points swing weight. I think that is something that would be tolerable. And like Prince used to put the swing weight. They used to have like, oh, this is a 290 swing weight unstrung. And then
Hmm.
okay, it's a 320 strung racket approx, depending on the gauge of your string and so on, like the weight of the string. So you have an idea. But most of them they just put like weight and balance and like the swing weight. Obviously, if all the weight is in the head, or it's centered around 12, the swing weight is going to be too high. And for some people they don't want to customize, which I completely get, or they don't have access to a professional customizer or someone who can help them. So then
Hmm.
getting the wrong racket with the wrong swing weight is like a huge, like it must feel shit because you have to send it back or you have to sell it or you just can't play with it, although it's a model you would like to play with.
Oh, especially and especially the quality control thing too. I mean, I know we talked about that with the balls, but I think rackets have been just as off recently. I mean, I like Yonex because they're so consistent across the board comparatively.
Yeah.
But it I've noticed some big differences in some of the other brands where um, there's a big range, bigger than I've ever seen in my however long I've been working in the tennis stores. And
Yeah, no,
I'm sure it's similar for you
I
too.
noticed that too. I think like it had a period of slipping at least a little bit, where you felt like maybe they didn't put enough attention to this. And I think there's a big benefit in Yonex case that they actually have their factory, being their factory. It's not like, a factory they're leasing or using. Um, they're using the same factory most of the other brands, like or similar factories but the Yonex they have their own, and they can manage the quality control process being a bit more diligent. I'm sure the other ones can also put maybe more focus on it, and it's more from a company point of view. But I think that they've built that brand quite well, Yonex, and it's like people know, okay, weight balance is going to be a bit closer. Most likely swing weight would be a bit closer, although I've seen some ups
Hmm.
and downs there as well recently that didn't exist before. I thought they were pretty bit better before, but still it's pretty good,
Yeah.
so you, as a consumer, you want that assurance of some kind, right?
Oh, exactly. And especially, I mean, Yonex has grown so much in the past 5 years. I mean, I remember when they were barely on tour and there were a handful of people that were playing with them. There's Kyrgios, Stan, and some other people, but they were huge for a while. They're big for a while, and then they kind of fell off a little bit. But it's been interesting to see them kind of come back a little bit. And most of the tours playing with them now. I mean, not most, but a lot more than
Yeah.
previously. So I'm sure it's a scaling thing too. Um, they're making more rackets, so the variance is going to be a little bit bigger just because larger sample size, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think that's they've really grown their brand. Like it's been a pretty significant uptick, at least when you look at the pros, and when you see the pros, you also know that then they're selling more rackets because a pro sells, right? So if you have a top 10 player or top 20, they're gonna sell more rackets, and you see a lot of East zones, V cores, and even Percepts now, or V core pros around, right? So I mean, like Tiafo playing with the V core pro, and Hurkacz and Stan, Chapo. It's like a lot of Chapo uses the V core, but it's like so it's great to see a brand doing well, and because they're pushing, but then obviously it's gonna be they're gonna reach some capacity issues maybe at some point. When it comes to your father's store, like what do you see is like do you see any bestsellers? Like do you sell a lot of like head TS I6, or you don't have that one, or it's like Pro Staff 97? So
Yeah, so we don't carry kind of like the TAS6 or anything like that. We focus on more of like the higher end stuff.
yeah,
And
good.
the reason we do that is it's just a better racket. It's a better product. It's going to last longer. The TIS6 or any of the other comparable ones from any of the other brands it's a good racket for to get into tennis, right? But we focus on making sure you get a racket that's going to last you a while, and it's going to be a good playing racket, right? It's we generally speaking don't carry any like pre-strung, just because it's better just to get a fresh string job, and you don't know how long the strings have been sitting in there and who strung them, right? There's a lot of factors, but obviously Yonex has made a huge kind of jump. Babolat is huge. I really liked the Head Extreme series. That that was like kind of their, in some ways, their worst series for a while, but the past couple of iterations I think have been awesome. I really like the Extreme Tour. I think that plays really well, and if you add a little lead tape, give a little more stability, it's a great racket. I really like how those ones play. But the Pure Arrow always, we sell a million of those things. Just whether it's Rafa or now Alcaraz, right? They've always had kind of a good base of players with uh, those sticks.
Yeah, I think that obviously helps a lot. Like, and also they're relatively easy to use, and so I think people like that. It has some addictive power and spin that most people want. They want help. So I
Hmm.
think that Babla was always early in that game of like, okay, this is the racket that's going to give you the most of everything. Then they had maybe some issues with stiffness and dampening. They've improved the dampening quite a lot, I think, as well in recent rackets, especially the new arrows. I think are more dampened. So
Hmm.
they have those kind of like factors to where people really want to use something easy to use, But it's the players are so important. Like I think head speed line is the most important, most selling because of Novak, and then you have Rafa with the arrow and Fed with the pro staff. I mean, Fed's gonna keep selling rackets for I don't know how long because he's still like the main ambassador. I would feel like.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. It's different for us. Oh, very rarely, I mean, more often, less with Federer now that he's not on tour. But he was like he sold the most amount of rackets, I think, as like a customer coming in and saying, "Hey, I want to play with the racket that Federer is playing with," and we're like, "All right,
Mm.
calm down. You're going to play with the lighter one. We can still get your pro staff." But having his face, I think, was the biggest thing for Wilson, and same with Rafa. With Novak, I've seen less people asking for the speed. Um, Not no one, but it's amazing to see the gap between people asking for like the pro staff or the arrow versus the speed, at least in our stores. And head's a little bit smaller, I think, in the either our region or the U.S. as a whole. Compared, I think in Europe, it sounds like it's the market share is quite a bit higher. Um,
Yeah,
just
I
being
think
kind of a European company.
Yeah, exactly. I think the tradition of head rackets is very European. I would guess that too.
Hmm.
While I think Babla were very good with getting traction through the colleges in the States and stuff like that. So I think that was a good smart strategy. And then obviously they had some exciting players in Moya with the Pure Drive early, and then on the women's side they have some strong players, and Rafa of course being the leader, and now also Alcaraz. So it's like it's been a perfect transition for them because I think there's a worry obviously like if I was Wilson, I would be like, what are we doing with the pro staff now? I mean, you can still sell it as an icon thing, like okay, Fed the icon. What did he use? The pro staff. But at some point,
Yeah.
maybe they need a new face.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I don't love the brown color on the new ones. Uh, it, some people like it. And I'm just not a big fan. They had to do something different, right?
Yeah.
But I'd love to see kind of a little more of that classic. Like in my mind, I think of like the K factor or the N code, like that kind of red with like the white or the black. I'd love to see one of those come back. As far as the paint job, I, I'm a paint job guy. I think Babolat does a great job. They make some really good looking rackets, and
Yep.
Yonex does too. I like how simple headline is. I mean, it's pretty consistent across the board, and Wilson has been too. But I'm not a fan of that like bronzy brown color.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think like since they have several different lines, I think like pro staffs they can either go black, which I think was a good choice because Pro Staff 85,
Hmm.
with the black and the yellow and the like they did version
Yep.
13 looked great. I thought it was a smashing racket. So
Oh
I
yeah.
think people then expected, either to keep going in that tradition, but obviously when they launched their like color shifting type of blade, they needed to go that kind of route, but they could have gone
Hmm.
maybe with some classy silver, or if they want to do color shifting, right, or gold or something. I thought this would be more gold than it was more brown than
Yeah.
gold. That's where I think some people who saw early pictures were like, I thought gold would be a bit more like premium prestige, like stylish kind of thing, and the brown was. It's obviously more of a color that's gonna divide people. I think like some people will
Oh,
not buy that;
exactly.
they will just stock up on the version 13 instead.
Yeah. And maybe that's what they were going for, right? Maybe they were trying to get a little controversy with the brown going.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I forgot how many grams it was, but the difference between like a matte and a glossy finish, how much weight the glossy adds to the racket. I was talking with Roman out with RPNY a couple of years
Ah,
ago, and
Pro. Yeah, yeah, cool. Yeah, he's a good guy.
yeah, yeah, he's a super nice guy, and incredibly knowledgeable too. I mean, obviously, if you're stringing for Agassi and stuff, you should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Even like that small thing of adding like a glossy finish, which I like better. I like the feel a little bit better with the glossy, but even that can add weight, and I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, for the pros, it's maybe not a huge thing if it's glossy and like they usually have slightly heavier rackets overall. But I'm a
Hmm.
big, I much prefer glossy rackets. I just like the feeling
Yeah.
better. I mean, old school maybe, I don't know, but it's just something that I prefer. Like if I can have it, but most rackets today are matte, so that's what you're getting. Like you know it pretty well by now. And then some rackets are pretty safe. I just got like a Pro Staff 97 Noir edition. That's the
Hmm.
easy one. They do like Head does it like with the
Yep.
blacked out one for US Open, and now Wilson as well do it like pretty much with I guess all of their lines. They pick one and they go blacked out, and that look good. Like it look. I mean, I would
Yeah.
still like it glossy, but it look good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it, and the noir ones are a little bit. They're kind of in between. It's not like the super matte, like
No,
where you can kind
no.
of feel it. Um, yeah, but I'm always a glossy guy, and I think the paint holds up a little bit better too when you have that gloss on there.
For sure. And also sometimes it's like players are so picky when you talk to the pros. Like some, they need a racket strung at a certain time. They need obviously the weight and everything to be. And some are like really like almost they can't trust anyone. So they go in and like I have to check my rackets as soon as they get a batch. Like they have to check on a 3-in-1 or a 4-in-1 machine to make sure
Yeah.
that specs are even if they come straight from Bobble Ahead or Wilson or whatever from there
Hmm.
and they're top 50 players, but they don't trust it. Like they need every
Yeah.
gram, everything, do their own grips. Like it's quite like such a sport.
And that's the interesting thing because I've seen a lot of those, but I've also seen just as many that almost have no idea what racket they play with, or other than it being like a head, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I just play with a head. Okay, which one? Uh, the blue one. Or I'm like, you're on tour. What do you mean you don't know what racket you play with? Um, so it's kind of funny how it's either like I'm super fanatical about string tension, racket, what shape the grip palette is, all that kind of like, it's a big rabbit hole you can go down. And then others are like, no, I'm just going to focus on my tennis and I'm just going to play with what my coach tells me to. Right.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard. Like some guys I would guess are one way, but they turn out to be the complete opposite. I'm talking about pros here. And then like some guys are like, he probably doesn't care. And he's like, well, I'm the most, anal guy ever about this. Like I need everything to be this way and my grip needs to have this millimeter difference. And it's like extremely specific. It was funny because we talked about rackets and strings about from the Malaga Challenger, and there was one guy who was using like a 440-gram racket. I don't know if that's 14 ounces or what that is in the US, but
Yeah.
it's like it's an
That's insane.
insanely heavy racket. Like it's I
Oh
don't even
God.
know. Yeah. It's crazy, right? So he had like some odd stuff on the grip, and I'll do that in a future video. But it's like and so much lead tape. It was like a pure strike. So much lead tape. It's insane amounts of lead tape. And okay, maybe works for him. I would like to
Yeah.
see how he got to that conclusion, but it's because that's quite extreme.
Like, hey, I'll just add a little more. Like, I'll add a little more. Oh, that felt good. I'll add a little more. Then you're like all the way around the hoop and outside under the grommets.
Yeah, that's a good thing with your racket. You don't need to add any weight. It's already there for
Oh,
playing.
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if you start adding weight to your racket, then it starts getting like, okay, then you have to be like Hurkacz or Stan the man who uses. We have Stan's racket in the office, and it's a heavy one. Like it feels like a log
Yeah.
to swing. He's a strong guy, but no, it's a heavy one.
Oh, exactly. I know. I'd like to say I'm in like the same shape that like Tiafo is, but not quite.
Yeah, it's like so much also coming from their technique and their like well, you have in tennis you have to. It's a sport with both quality and quantity. Like and it's like need
Hmm.
to hit so many balls just to understand your own kind of biochemistry and like where you're actually playing, like where your strike zone should be and how like you have to get that feeling ingrained in your muscle fibers almost. While at the same time, if you don't do the right thing, you ingrain bad habits and you're never going to reach a higher level because you have these strange habits that
Exactly. Yeah. It's like that mental thing, the getting to the point where you don't have to think when you're hitting,
yeah.
right? Yeah. But, you know, we're always thinking.
Yeah, and I thought one of the things I've struggled like the most to overcome when I started playing like more serious tournaments, like serious. I mean, it's ITF Opens where you can actually
Hmm.
face like a pro or face someone.
Yeah.
Is that like you have to have your own small little tricks, and I'm not a very competitive guy, so for me, I always struggle with the competitive part because if I'm like a happy-go-lucky guy who's like wants to talk in between points, and I don't really care that much, I just want to have a good time, and the other guy
Hmm.
is like I'm gonna murder this guy. All I care about is
Yeah.
winning it's such a mismatch, and it feels like a weird thing, then I'd rather like not play the tournament because it's not like going to be a huge prize money. So it's not like I can
Yeah,
understand if you go on a futures tournament, like people want to win, obviously it's their job, right? But
totally.
this more casual players or like good club players playing tournaments is not shouldn't be that in my opinion. So that's how I feel. How do you feel? Like, did you ever compete or try even local club tournaments, something to well, how are you like when it comes to nerves on the tennis court?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say I'm not, but I'm a little bit of a mental mess on the court. I like totally different than when I'm off. It, it's just different. I mean, I'm a little overly competitive sometimes. And no one likes to lose, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's kind of one of the biggest things. Because I obviously want to, I always want to blow someone off the court, right? And that's not how you play smart tennis. So that was kind of the biggest hurdle to get over. Because it's like, oh, I should crush this guy. They're so much worse than I am, but they get more balls in play or whatever it is, right? At any level, consistency is the biggest thing. Just getting them over the net and um, yeah. So mentality is a tough one for me.
Yeah, it is. I think I had this on another conversation, and it's like I'm a Fed fan. I mean, you're also a Federer guy, right?
Oh, of
I
course.
like all three in a way, but it's like that's
Mhm.
Federer is the reason I got back into tennis, like his way of
Yeah.
playing, and you can see it on the back here. Um, but it's uh, I think he kind of inspired people to play tennis in the wrong way, right? So it's like I could almost blame him for getting people in this mindset of like taking the ball early, going for winners that they shouldn't have no business going for, and playing that kind of aggressive, beautiful tennis that he played. But his talent is and also like work ethic and everything that went into kind of
Yeah.
creating that player. I think some people don't realize like to win 20 Grand Slams with this crazy style and to win 20 Grand Slams with more of a defensive style, it's different. Like it's still amazing, but it's like I don't know how you win 20 Grand Slams playing this kind of crazy attacking tennis. This is a bit odd to me.
No, it's amazing. Especially I have a one-handed backhand because of Federer, obviously.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
he uh, you can't argue that he has the most beautiful game. I'd argue of all time. I
Of
can't
course.
think of anyone that I know of that number one moves better, and he makes it look so easy, right? I think that's the biggest thing, and people don't realize the work that he had to put in to be able to move like that, to anticipate like that, and yeah, he's like the pinnacle of it. I think the argument's kind of over as far as the best like player, like tennis
Yeah,
player,
we
but
know that it's Novak, right? So it's like it's fine.
yeah, it, exactly. I've been disputing that for a long time, but in the past couple of years, you have to kind of accept it as a Fed fan at this point. But you can't argue that he has the best looking game.
No, I don't think that's even up for grabs. So well, some people will always argue anything, but
Yeah.
I think that's it. And they all bring like I would see them as kind of like Marvel superheroes. They bring their own superpowers, but in terms of Federer, it's like the kind of elegance he brings, this the simplicity. It's like ballet playing tennis. And how hard that is. And I think that sometimes tripped people. I mean, tripped me up many times to play overly aggressive. Because you're such a fan of a certain player, you want to imitate some things, and people buy the RF97, which is too much of a racket for most players, and then they
Yep.
want to take the ball early, play that one-handed backhand down the line, but it's just gonna sail out or you're just gonna miss it, and it's like it's better to play a safe slice cross court or take another decision. So it's like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I as long as you enjoy it and it doesn't like hurt you in a way, I think people should play with the way they want to play. Like that's also
Yeah.
that because I always get this thing with the racket situation. I'm sure you get it like in the shop as well. It's like people they want to play with a racket, but everything in your head tells you like, okay, he should be playing with a not a big baba, but he should be playing with a Clash
Yeah.
108 or something
Yeah.
easy on the arm, easy to play with, big sweet spot, and that's what you say. But then you can't really get people away sometimes because they want to be Federer or they want to play like Rafa, and that's gonna dictate their choice, and that's what makes them feel good. So I guess like the feel good factor, unless you're getting injured from the racket, is there.
Hmm.
So I tend to allow people to, or allow, like I tend to say, okay, if you want
Yeah.
to play with a mid-size racket because you love Safin, go ahead, but you just know that you're maybe limiting your own results. That's just like the awareness of that, why you're making that
Oh,
decision.
exactly. And it comes down to that mentality thing too. I mean, it, I've had a million people come in and they're waffling between four different demos, right? And it's like, okay, did you like one a little bit better? Because at some point you just have to commit to one, right? And once you can kind of commit without feeling like, oh, well, maybe I should have picked one of those other ones. I think that's kind of a big factor. And again, going back to the paint job thing, we have like ladies that come in and I hand them a couple different rackets, like the Extreme, E Zone, and then I don't know, Blade or something like that. They just don't like the green on the Extreme and the Blade. They're like, I like the E Zone because it's blue. Like, okay, play with them first and make sure you don't hate the racket, but you have to like how the how you have to like the racket, right? I'm not going to push you into something that you don't like.
Now I think it's funny because like I'm a I'm a more of a playability. Like I completely get why people would choose like a nice design, but
Hmm.
testing so many rackets, like how the racket plays and how it makes me feel on the court, like I feel like it's
Yeah.
making me make more shots. But it's also like because also I can go and maybe custom paint them because I have like the nicky around and with Armstrong customs and stuff.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
um,
And they do a
it's
great
still
job
like
on stuff.
one racket I'm using now testing around is like a Pro Kenix and it's like so ugly. It's like it almost hurts you when
Yeah.
you're playing
Right.
it. And then you get like the Pro stuff, the blacked out, and it's the shape of the racket looks good. Like I sometimes struggle with even with although I really like Yonex rackets because the isometric head shape kind of irks me a little bit,
Hmm.
but they
Yeah.
play very, very forgiving because of that shape.
Totally. Yeah. And
But
it's just it's weird when you look down and you're like, hey, this looks different than what I'm used to. What
yeah,
in whatever direction it is, right?
it's a thing. So, but then I do get this thing when I also been around the courts in the clubs here in Marbella, and then if, for example, if I bring the pure Arrow Rafa, not the Origin one, but sometimes the Origin is the same design, right? But the lighter one,
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
lot of women come up and like, what is this racket like? It's like this,
Yeah.
cliche of like, oh, but it just stands out. It's pink, it's vibrant, it's lively. It like makes people look, and they just go like, wow, this is an amazing racket. Like, while maybe guys are more like, okay, I want a blacked out, or like maybe that blade style, where it's like color shifting green. It's a safe bet,
Hmm.
looks cool. It's easy choice, right?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. And it all comes down to personal preference. I mean, playability is the number one factor, but sometimes whether someone's not good enough to notice the difference between the two, there's other factors too, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. Must be tough to be in the shop and also being like, I know what I should recommend, but some people are just reluctant also to taking the recommendation and listening to it. So
Hmm.
that's also a complication, right? So
Yeah.
for you, then you have to find like a compromise of like the what's probably better for this player, but is also a little bit in the way he wants to play tennis, for example. I think that is important. What does your father play with? I have to ask now.
So he switches so often. I think he's playing with the Aero Plus now.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, and I like BattleBot rackets in a lot of ways, and they're super popular. But I have never been able to find one that I like really like playing with. I think they look great, and obviously a lot of people really like them. But I just can't seem to find one that I've enjoyed, and I don't know if it's I mean the palette shape or what, but I've been trying. But he's been enjoying that. He was an RF guy for a while. So he was playing with that. It annoys the crap out of me because he can pretty much play with any racket, and it doesn't really mess with him that much. I, like we'll be hitting and he'll pull out a super oversized some new one that came out, and I'm like, how are you hitting the same with different rackets, Dad? Are you serious? This is ridiculous. So he changes pretty often, and I've gotten that disease a little bit. I like switching around, so it's nice to have the stores that I have the ability to do that without having to buy new ones all the time.
Yeah, it's a tough one because like if you want to be a good player, switching a lot seems to hurt you. I mean, some people can adjust.
Yeah.
I've learned to adjust a bit, but also when you test so much, you also know that okay, I play a bit like when you start playing matches, then you can't be switching around. I've tested all in
Oh,
many matches
exactly.
where I'm like playing with different racket each set. So if I'm playing 3 sets, I'm playing a
Mhm.
different racket each set because I get a lot of
Yeah.
information. And even players have told me like, oh, first set you were pretty erratic, and then what happened? You second set you played really well and you won. I'm like, yeah, well, I played with my normal racket in the second set, and the first set that
Yeah.
was used the shift and it was flying. So it's like
Yeah.
it can be risky, but it's a good way to get information about the rackets as well.
Yeah. And the shift is an interesting racket. It has a different feel because I have played with 1820s in the past, and I don't think it feels like an 1820 that I've played before. It's
Not at
just
all. Yeah.
it's kind of fun, but it's a weird racket.
Yeah, I think I talked to it was Chris who said it. Like he really likes the 1820 shift. I kind of prefer the
Mhm.
1620. It was a bit easier to use, but the 1820 plays nice. But it's just like it has something. I'm an 1820 guy from the beginning, so for me, it's a bit too lively still because it has so much spin for an 1820 that you
Yeah.
like the string pattern is just the drilling spacing and everything. So everything on the racket makes a difference. That's what people have to understand. Like the throat shape, the cross section design, everything is making the contact with the ball different. There's so many things that goes into it. So it's not like
Yeah.
easy to just look at specs and go, this will play like this. It's an 1820 315 gram racket. No, it doesn't play like that at all. It's
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
opposite.
I remember when our rep brought them in, we got like the prototype versions before kind of the general release. And I'm like, wait, so this is a spin racket, but it's an 1820? How does that make any sense? Yeah, but I mean, it, it's still it's done well. I think it looks good,
Yeah, looks great.
and it feels pretty good too.
Yeah, it's a good racket. I like gutsy moves when they bring out something new. I like that there's some innovation. I do get like if you found a mold that works and then you just want to like tweak the layup or the new technology like the
Mhm.
Oxetic rackets, I feel like they play much better than the 360 plus overall.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, exactly. So I see the continuation, and also the pros and the advanced players are giving feedback that they like the molds. Like a lot of pros use head molds, so it's like okay, you have
Yeah.
something there. You don't want to screw it up. But then also like this like idea. Okay, let's bring out the Clash, which is like a catapult racket, but like it works. It's for the arm. It tends to be quite good. Some players might have issues with it, but overall it's been pretty arm friendly for most people. It seems like, and it has its own unique identity, and it's a bit of a gutsy. You try it, you see, okay, well, let's throw this out there, and fingers crossed,
Hmm.
people will like it. It's I like that there's some kind of innovation in some direction going on.
Oh, exactly. And it's nice to see. I mean, Babolat's always kind of stuck to their small improvements on the kind of name brand lines, like the Pure Drive, the Pure Arrow, and the Strike. And I like how simple their line is. It's been nice to see a new kind of line come out with the Rafa series. That's been fun to play with. But then Wilson, on the other hand, I think makes a lot of changes. It seems like they kind of go back and forth, and some of them have done really well, and others have not played as well. Yeah, so it's just interesting to see their different strategies as far as the engineering side of things.
I do, yeah. I'm a simplicity guy in general. I like the ease of understanding of, and I think the consumers do too. Although I have no data to back this up, but it's like, okay, Baula, they have like spin power. Strike is still powerful, but it's controlled, relatively speaking, and the Strike VS, which is very controlled.
Hmm.
Um, then head is has a much broader spectrum. It still has like the
Yeah.
CPI scale, so you get some, but okay, people don't understand the CPI scale. I think if they're a base consumer, and there's so many rackets, so that's where you as a shop or I as kind of a racket reviewer needs to come in and be like, all right, so this one plays more like this. This is a bit easier way to go, but also Yonex with like okay spin power control. Like, do you need more lines? Then I don't know. I have a feel. I mean, maybe there's a middle ground, but you can also,
Hmm.
since you're having like 4 or 5 rackets in each silo, this seems like the middle ground is in the silo, so you can then kind of like navigate that. It just feels like it's easier for the consumers to have less choice sometimes.
Oh, exactly. And I one brand that never gets talked about as much. They do really well with us because it's a ski company as well, Volcal.
Yeah.
Because all the Coloradans that ski, they're like, oh yeah, I know Volcal skis, right? I didn't know they made rackets, and I think their line's especially interesting because number one, I find they're the most arm-friendly rackets out there. I mean, they're very muted. There's not a lot of feedback, so I'd say a lot of the more advanced players don't play with them quite as often. But anyone that has tennis elbow, I make them try Vocal. I usually even don't charge them for that demo sometimes, just because I want them to try it, even though it's not a name brand. But their line's interesting because they have a million SKUs, which I find a little bit annoying because I don't know that you need that many. Um, but the 1 to 10 kind of scale, where one being like the game improvement, big head size rackets, to the 10 being the kind of most control. I think it's a simple way to do it. I don't know. I don't know what's right or wrong, but it's something different than other ones out there.
Yeah, it seems like the technology works pretty well with the REVA, I think it's called in the handle. I think it seems to be,
Hmm.
like you said, like as soon as you start adding a lot of dampening, the cost is obviously that you're not maybe as connected to the ball. But and some people hate dampening of all kinds, and some people love
Yeah.
it. Like it's just a different of taste. But for players that are maybe less racket savvy or aware, I think it's good to have the possibility to go like a really dampened racket. Like it makes sense, you know. And I mean, your elbow will be happy with most of these models. I try. I mean, a friend of mine switched to Volcally. He plays futures, you know, a few months ago,
Hmm.
and I play with it. It's good. It's a good stick. Like, I mean, I haven't tried it
Yeah.
before. I'm not like super knowledgeable about the current line, but it was a good stick. So there's like you can also look outside, you know, what's the most common on the pro tour, or like I mean, they're good Dunlop sticks. Volkel you mentioned. Um, Solinko makes some good rackets as well. Like the new ones are, and they're not that many to choose from, so pretty basic choice. So I think there's room, but it's very difficult. Like I think it's easier for you, for example, as a young entrepreneur, to kind of go in strings. You can, you know, make more of an impact. I think rackets so tough to build. Like to even for Technifiber that did a really good job in like getting players and improving their products. I think
Hmm.
it's like still gonna take a long time before a guy who's the casual tennis player is gonna be like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna play with a Technifiber racket. Like it's still even with Medvedev and Iga, it's still some time away. I think.
Oh, exactly. And the technology is pretty similar across the board. I mean, I don't know that there's one company that's like, hey, we're way ahead of everyone else as far as technology goes. I mean, for the most part, they're all graphite rackets, and that's kind of the top of the line with kind of their own different things. Whereas, and I've had a few people approach me saying, hey, are you interested in doing rackets too? Um, in like a more environmentally friendly way. And it's an interesting idea, but I think the racket market's so hard to get into. Number one, there's not that the string market isn't saturated, but there's a lot more factors that go into a tennis racket versus tennis string. And I find the string side more interesting, from like a product improvement standpoint, just because I think there has been more change in string, I would argue, than in rackets. Um, whether it be polyesters or different kinds of polyesters.
No, 100%. I mean, like that's what changed the game. Like it's like 1997 with Querten coming with the poly, you know, and the Big Banger, and that changed everything. Like people suddenly could swing out full, and some people will argue, like I have some purists on watching the channel or commenting on Instagram, they'd be like, nobody should play with poly. I hate polys, multifilaments and prestiges. That's what we should be using. Because I mean, it's a throwback. They're usually not younger
Yeah,
guys, obviously. So I get that sentiment. You know, they don't play with spin, so nobody else should play with spin because it's like cheating, and they probably
exactly.
lose. So, it's like tennis evolved, and it's that just we have to find ways, but there's still lots of improvement. I think in terms of strings, because we haven't really found like there's I know still big brands working on like what can we do with multifilaments, what can we do? Can we find like the optimal softness and stiffness in one string that is still like arm friendly but can give you good spin. And now you also bring on that there's a biodegradability possibility in the whole industry as well. So I think there's still lots of room there with rackets, graphites. I mean, when I say it's like good to see innovation, is because it's like you said, it is. If you look at the Pure Drive, you know, was out in the mid '90s, you know, and it's similar, not super different. If I gave a beginner a Pure Drive from the first edition, the original one from 95, I think it was, or something earlier, and then give it the latest one, they will feel a difference, but it might not be like playing with a gut string and a poly string, for example. So it's like there
Yeah.
definitely been bigger impacts from the strings than the rackets.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, the string's fun too because you can change the color. Like it's changed more often, so I think there's more room for experimentation too. Because no one's going to buy. People don't buy, generally speaking, um, a new racket every 6 months or something like that, right? I mean, it does change. There are people that like to experiment around and have big collections, and I'm one of them. I don't know that it different cat kind of circumstances being in the tennis store, but it's interesting because I think string has so much room for number one product knowledge as far as people like customers and players out there. I think hybrids are a great option, especially doing like some sort of multi-filament in the main and then a polyester in the cross to get a little bit of that kind of polyester feel, but still kind of absorbing the shock and everything. I think a lot more people should be playing around with that. Obviously, one of the big things people go for the polyester is the durability factor, but they should also be stringing more often because it goes dead. There's a lot of room for improvement, I think, overall as a tennis market, but especially sustainability wise, I think there's definitely some room to grow.
Do you have like a plan? Like this is my final question because we've been going on for a while, and I also have a dinner. But it's great. Like talking to fellow tennis nerds is the best. It's like you always lose track of time, and I love it.
Oh
But
yeah, no kidding. This has been awesome.
yeah, it's always fun. Anytime, man. Like it's always fun to get into the nerdy stuff. But do you have like a plan for your like what would be a dream scenario in 5 to 10 years for you? Like what would be like if you could put visualize the future, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I really do love the tennis industry. It's there's great people in it. It's it's fun to work in. It really is. So it's a tough question. I definitely am going to build out the line, but I'm hoping more. I'm obviously going to be working on sustainable products, but the big thing is I think everybody else should too. You know, I think it makes a difference for everybody if we, even as small as a tennis market, right? If that can happen in a market that really doesn't change that much, generally speaking, as far as product goes, I think once that starts, I think a lot of other sports will follow too. And I just like to see a little bit more push for better, more sustainable products that aren't going to fill up landfills or the ocean or anything like that, you know?
I think that's great, and I think it's good that you have like a bigger overarching goal because I think it also helps I would say it's so important to have like a purpose driven business, like especially today, like you can have a money driven business, sure, but for your mental health and happiness, I think it's good to have a purpose driven business with a bigger goal than just selling lots of strings in this case or selling whatever
Yeah.
product you're selling. So I think that's going to help you propel it and also maybe help you change the whole industry because there is a possibility to change the whole game of tennis. Like there's like things change quickly, and we might need to change the sport from rules, from standardization with equipment, and from the actual equipment being how it's processed and made. So I think that's we're in an interesting phase in the sport, and the more smart guys we have like you around that push the right narrative, the better.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future too. I mean, I think we have a bright future, no matter what. So as long as there's some people out there trying to make it better, I think kind of the sky's the limit, right?
That's great. All right, Ryan, thanks. That's a great note to end on. Really
Yeah,
appreciate your time. Like the string a lot. I've been testing it quite a bit, so my review will be out probably alongside this one, or in some different conjunction. I'll make some clips as well. But yeah, best of luck. Happily test more
perfect.
strings in the future or more gauges, whatever you have coming up.
Awesome.
And I would like really want your product to succeed because I think it has the right background and mentality and
Yeah, and
sustainability.
thanks so much for taking the time. I mean, I know I'm kind of a smaller brand compared to everybody else, but it means a lot to be able to. I've been watching your videos for a long time, and you do a great job So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me too. It means a lot to be able to come on here and chat with you.
No, I find it great. I also want to put the spotlight on young, up and coming companies. I think that's what's kind of my job is partly as well, like to actually highlight the variety of choices and new initiatives and stuff like that. Like just talking about Babala, Wilson, and Head is not super exciting. So this is more and more up my alley. So that's why I want to do it as well. And I think it's a great symbiosis kind of.
Great talking with you, and it was nice to finally get to chat. I know we had a little back and forth trying to figure out a time.
All right, man. Have a nice day now.
Going,
And yours is
thanks.
starting, mine is ending, and we keep in touch.
Sounds good. Go enjoy dinner. Sorry to
I
keep
will.
you.
Nice chatting with you, Ryan.
Awesome. You too. Have a good one.